Hello, and welcome back to another World Princess Week story. I'm your lovely host, Mrs. Disney, and I have here a very special guest with me, Quinn. How you doing, Quinn? Hopefully Quinn will be on a little bit of a good behavior, unlike yesterday where he kept bothering me, but that's okay. In today's reading, we're going to be learning about another princess and how she shows courage and kindness. Let's read about Belle. Belle adores reading. Different stories takes her to new places, introduce her to new people, and allow her to see new perspectives. She's confident and comfortable being herself. In fact, Belle's mind is one thing she is very sure of, and she is not afraid to share her opinion with anyone. But her status as the town outsider taught her to look past what is on the surface and see the best in people. Today's story is New Friends, written by Kathy McCullough and illustrated by Anne Marcelino. Again, if I mispronounce, I'm sorry. Belle relaxed in a nook of the castle library, rereading one of her favorite books. The prince had gifted her the library when he was still a beast, and she spent as much time as she could in it, usually with a book on her lap. She was amazed at the way inked symbols on a page could bring a whole story to life. It was magical how letters formed words, and words formed sentences that could transport her to other places, teach her about new things, and introduce her to people who seemed so real. It was as if they were right there with her. The door to the library flew open, and a very real person burst into the room. "Belle, your father has returned," cried Monsieur Cogsworth, the castle's major domo. Belle hurried down to the castle's grand entranceway. "Welcome home to the castle, Papa," she said, giving Maurice a warm hug. "Just a brief stop for the night, sweetheart," Maurice replied, "before I head north." Belle's father spent the spring traveling to festivals and fairs to sell his inventions. "But look what I have for you." He handed Belle 3 wrapped packages, books from Spain, Portugal, and Morocco. The castle library had plenty of books on the history and geography of nations other than France, where Belle lived. But while atlases and history books offered facts, Belle believed storybooks could show what the people in those lands were really like, how they lived, and what their hopes and dreams were. A few collections of fairy tales and folk tales from around the world dotted the castle library shelves, but Belle longed to have newer stories about these places. When Maurice had set off on his journey the month before, Belle had given him a stack of French books to take along to offer to foreign travelers he met in return for books from their countries. Belle eagerly unwrapped the top package and opened the first book. "Oh no," she said. She held up the book to show Maurice. "It's in Spanish. I don't know that language." Belle shook her head with a laugh. "I should have guessed the books would be in their country's languages." She flipped through a book from Portugal, which was, of course, in Portuguese. She then opened the first Moroccan book. "This must be Arabic," she said, marveling at the beautiful cursive letters. "There are wonderful stories on these pages. I know it." She ran her fingers over the Arabic words, "but they're hidden from me, even though the words are plain to see." "I searched the whole library," Belle told Maurice and the prince at dinner that night, "twice, but we don't have any foreign language dictionaries." "There are dictionaries that translate French into other languages," the prince asked. I'm sure there are, Belle said, but I've never seen one. Those types of dictionaries are probably kept in places like university libraries. Oh, that reminds me. Maurice searched through the many pockets in his vest until he found a small envelope. He handed it to Belle. I was given this with the books from Morocco. Belle opened the envelope. Her eyes widened as she read the note inside. A librarian from a university in Fez, Morocco is coming here. The librarian's name was Fatima Badou, and she heard about Belle's quest to expand the castle library from the Moroccan merchant who had given Maurice the Arabic books. We haven't had guests at the castle since I was a little boy, the prince said, worried. I wouldn't know what to do or how to behave. You have so had a guest since then, Belle reminded him, gesturing to herself. That turned out pretty well, she smiled. The prince blushed. That was different. That was you. Belle took his hand and squeezed it. Just be yourself, she said. Your new friendly self. The prince laughed. He wasn't the only occupant in the castle worried about the visit, however. They're arriving in a week? Cogsworth exclaimed when he heard the news. No, that's too soon. Cogsworth's job was to make sure everything at the castle ran smoothly. A week would not be nearly enough time to get everything ready. How do we prepare the rooms? He asked. Do they prefer tea at bedtime or warm milk? Do they wake up early or do they like to sleep in? Exactamente, said Lumiere, the castle maitre d'. We don't know what time they prefer to dine. Are the meals to be big or small? Do they like entertainment with their meal or after? Or both? Even Mrs. Potts, the cook, who was usually so cheerful, clutched her apron nervously. Oh dear, we don't know what kinds of fruits and vegetables they like, or what their favorite desserts might be, she said. I want them to feel at home, but I have no idea where to begin in choosing which recipes to make. Do we have to learn Moroccan? Asked Chip, Mrs. Potts' young son. In Morocco, they speak Arabic, Belle explained to Chip. Mademoiselle Badou is bringing an interpreter with her, along with a driver and a cook. The interpreter will be able to translate Arabic into French for us, and vice versa. Belle smiled at the others. As for the answers to the rest of your questions, I know just where to look. Belle invited the group to the library and brought out all the books she could find about Morocco. If you still have questions when the visitors arrive, we'll just ask. When the visitors arrived, however, the first questions were for Belle. In the drawing room, as Lena, the interpreter, translated Fatima's words into French. Fatima asked Belle about growing up in the village and about how she ended up a princess. Fatima listened, rapt, as Lena translated Belle's answers into Arabic. After Belle finished the story of her adventures in the castle, Fatima responded in a voice filled with awe. It's like something out of a fairy tale, Lena said, translating. Belle smiled in agreement, although she thought Fatima's life sounded even more magical. To be a librarian at the oldest library in the world, Belle said. Belle had researched the University of Al-Qarawiyyin, where the library had been built centuries before. Fatima is named for Fatima al-Firi, the woman who built the university, Lena said, translating for Fatima. Because her parents chose this name, she says it was her destiny to grow up to be a librarian there. Luckily, it was her dream as well. It's so wonderful to meet someone who loves books like I do, Belle said. She and Fatima exchanged smiles as Lena repeated Belle's words in Arabic. Belle wished she and Fatima didn't have to wait for their words to be translated. They had so much to talk about. Fatima spoke again. Fatima wants to ask you more about your project to expand your library with books from other cultures, Lena said. This is something they have been doing at Al-Qarawiyyin for many years and translating them as well. Before Belle could reply, Mrs. Potts and Chip entered with a tea cart. Moroccan almond brochettes, Mrs. Potts said proudly, holding out a tray of triangular pastries. Brochettes, Fatima said with a smile. She and Lena each took one of the flaky treats. When they bit into them, however, they both winced and exchanged glances. Oh, dear me, Mrs. Potts said. The book only had a picture, no recipe, so I had to guess what was in it. Fatima spoke to Lena in Arabic. Our cook could teach you the recipe if you like, Lena told Mrs. Potts, translating for Fatima. That would be wonderful, Mrs. Potts replied. She gestured to the tea cart. In the meantime, we have plenty of bread and jam. Mulberry, Chip said, lifting the jar. He didn't have a good grip on it, however, and it tipped over, spilling thick purple jam onto Lena's lap. Sorry, Chip, near tears, bit his lip. It's perfectly fine, Lena reassured him. I have many lively nephews and nieces. I'm used to things getting a little messy now and then. I can go to my room and change. She turned to Fatima and they exchanged a few words in Arabic. Fatima smiled and nodded in response, and Mrs. Potts led Lena off to the guest quarters. Belle and Fatima were left alone in the drawing room, and the silence between them grew awkward. The guest quarters were at the opposite end of the castle, so Belle expected it would be some time before Lena returned. Knowing Fatima loved books as much as she did, Belle decided they'd both feel more comfortable surrounded by them. She stood and gestured for Fatima to join her. They left the drawing room and made their way through the halls of the castle, exchanging shy smiles. When they passed Cogsworth, Belle asked him to tell Lena where they'd gone. Finally, they arrived at the castle library. Fatima let out an exclamation of delight and said something in Arabic. Although Belle didn't understand the words, she could tell they were a compliment. Then she remembered hearing one of the Arabic words before, during their earlier conversation. Belle pulled a book off a shelf and held it up. Kitab? She asked. Fatima nodded. Kitab. Belle smiled and handed the book to Fatima. Book. Book, Fatima repeated. She crossed to the shelves. Kitab, 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 she said, tapping the spines of the books. She then gestured toward all the shelves. Maktaba, maktaba, Belle said. She remembered hearing Fatima say this word earlier too. Let me pause there. Ladies and gentlemen, if you do know Arabic and if I'm mispronouncing the word, please leave your answer in the comments so that way I know if I'm doing it right, or maybe you can leave a pronunciation for future reference. Thank you. Al-Quarawiyan, Fatima said and pointed to herself. Maktabdi. She gestured around the room again. Maktabet Belle. Belle knew Al-Quarawiyan was the library where Fatima worked. And right now they were in Belle's library, Belle said. Library, Fatima repeated, clapping her hands in delight. She gestured from herself to Belle and then to the books. Belle was pretty sure she understood the gesture. Yes, she said. Let's find more words to learn. Belle gathered several books with illustrations to help them teach each other. They then paged through the books, sharing the French and Arabic word for each item. Warda, Fatima said, pointing to a painting of a pink rose. Warda, Belle repeated. Rose. Rose, Fatima said. As they continued, Belle learned Guamar meant moon in Arabic, and Phil meant elephant. Belle brought out paper and pens so they could draw pictures of items they couldn't find in the books. They acted out movements like walking and sitting down, sharing the words in each language. They made faces to show emotions. Saida, Fatima said, adopting a joyful smile. Belle repeated the Arabic as Fatima nodded in approval. Happy, Belle said, translating the word to French. Happy, Fatima said. She and Belle exchanged warm smiles. It became harder when they attempted more complicated ideas, however. Belle tried to ask Fatima about her journey from Fez to the castle, but Fatima just shook her head, not understanding. Belle opened a map and used her fingers to mime walking from Fez to her village. Fatima replied in Arabic, gesturing with her hands as she spoke, but Belle was unsure what she was saying. Belle tried to think of another way they could teach each other, something they hadn't yet tried. Her eyes scanned the titles on the shelves for a book that might help them and landed on a collection of folk tales. She brought down the book and paged through to a tale from Morocco. She held it out to Fatima. Fatima took the book and studied the illustrations on the different pages. A smile came over her face as well. Al-Tair al-Azraq, she said. She flipped back to the first page of the story and pointed at the title, repeating the words. The Blue Bird, Belle said. You know it. Belle grabbed some paper and drew a blue bird. She showed it to Fatima, who nodded happily. Together, Belle and Fatima acted out the story about a princess who was visited every evening by two bluebirds. The birds were actually men who had been placed under a spell. The princess developed a fondness for one of the birds, and after the spell was broken, she and the man fell in love. Belle and Fatima each recited the words in her own language. As they went along, they then repeated the passages, with Belle doing her best to match the Arabic words to her actions, and Fatima doing the same with the French words. Their actions grew silly at times, causing them both to dissolve into laughter. When either got something wrong, the other would shake her head, and they'd try again. It was like solving a puzzle. Each new word or phrase they learned adding another piece to help bring the bigger picture to life. After they reached the story's happy ending, Fatima picked up a picture book they'd looked at earlier about two bears who meet in the woods and become friends. Fatima opened it to the final illustration of the bears holding hands. Astika, she said. She pointed to herself and then to Belle. Astika, Belle repeated. She was pretty sure she understood what the word meant. Friends, she said. Friends, Fatima repeated just as the library door swung open and the prince entered. Belle rushed over to him and grabbed his hands. Fatima and I have been teaching each other our languages, she told him. I can't believe how much I've learned. I'm glad things have been going well here, the prince said, looking grim. I'm afraid that's not the case in the rest of the castle. Why? Belle asked. What's happened? It's a disaster, Cogsworth cried as he raced in behind the prince, wringing his hands. Lumiere and Mrs. Potts entered next, each talking over the other. Calm down, Belle urged them. Tell me what happened, one at a time. Belle soon learned that the attempts by the prince and the others to communicate with their guests without an interpreter had not gone as well as it had with Belle and Fatima. The prince had tried to invite the driver to go riding in the woods, but was confused when the driver pointed to himself and then to the horses as he spoke. He smiled while he was talking, the prince said, but then he shook his head. I wasn't sure if he was saying yes or no. Fatima's cook had joined Mrs. Potts in the kitchen, where she showed him the picture of the almond briottes. The cook had pointed out the ingredients and the measuring utensils for each, but Mrs. Potts didn't understand his instructions, and the result had tasted even worse than her first attempt. "And I'm afraid it will be impossible for me to perform this evening," Lumiere declared in despair. He explained that the cook and the driver had passed by the room where he had been practicing his evening music selection. He had just finished a cabaret song when they both said something in Arabic. Assuming they preferred a different type of music, Lumiere switched to opera. But they spoke again, using the same words. "I tried many other music styles," Lumiere told Belle, "but they kept saying the same thing. I could not figure out their favorite." Lumiere sighed sadly. "Because the entertainment for guests must be the best or nothing." Lumiere hung his head. It will have to be nothing." Belle glanced at Fatima, who had been listening closely. Fatima may not have understood everything that was said, but Belle could tell the librarian had guessed there had been some misunderstandings between the visitors and castle residents. The eyes of the two friends met, and a message passed between them. They didn't need words or even gestures to understand each other. Fatima nodded and left the room. "Fatima will find Lena," Belle told the others. "I'm sure we could sort this all out and you could try again." "But the interpreter can't be everywhere at once," the prince said. "I'm worried we'll make our guests stay worse." "I must agree," Cogsworth said. "I don't agree," Belle said. "Fatima and I found a way to understand each other. It wasn't always easy, but we didn't give up, and now we're friends." She glanced around at the others. "It can be scary to get to know new people, but all friends are people who didn't know when you first met them." She shot a meaningful look at the prince. Belle and he had once been strangers too. "I guess it would be nicer for us to become friends with our visitors," the prince admitted. The others nodded. Fatima entered the library with Lena, now in fresh clothes, followed by the driver and the cook. With Lena's help, the residents and guests worked out their misunderstandings. "The driver thought you were showing him how to saddle a horse," Lena explained to the prince. "He was trying to explain that he already knew how." She smiled. "He would be honored to go riding with you." The prince grinned at the driver, relieved and pleased, and the driver nodded. Lena turned to Mrs. Potts. "Our cook knows how protective other cooks are of their kitchens, but if you would follow, he would show you the steps, and you could make the briottes together." "Oh, yes, that would be perfect," said Mrs. Potts, beaming at the cook. Lena then told Lumiere that the cook and driver were asking him if he would teach them some of his music. In return, they would love to share their favorite Moroccan songs with you. "I would be delighted," Lumiere said, thrilled. "I am always eager to add to my musical repertoire." By the end of their stay, the visitors and their hosts had become friends. The cook taught Mrs. Potts the true recipe for briottes, and she taught him how to make chocolate croissants. The prince and the driver explored the land around the castle and translated the names for different horse breeds for each other, using an illustrated book from the library. After their final dinner together, Lumiere serenaded the group with a selection of his favorite songs, along with the new Moroccan ones he had learned. The guests joined in for these last songs, filling the castle with music. The next morning, as the visitors got ready to leave, Fatima with Lena took Belle aside. Fatima spoke, and Lena translated. Fatima would love for you to write to each other and work together on a plan to make more language dictionaries for libraries everywhere." "Yes, Definitely, Belle said. And I'll come visit you and see your library. Lena translated, and Fatima nodded with enthusiasm. Fatima exchanged whispers with Lena, and then Fatima spoke. Yes, please visit, Fatima said in French. Please visit soon. Do you want to take a trip to Morocco? The prince asked after the visitors had left. What better way to learn Arabic? Belle said with a grin. And then we can plan our other travels. Other travels? The prince said, looking intrigued. Belle took his hands and smiled up at him. There are so many lands to visit, and people to meet, and languages to study, she said. Isn't it wonderful to know we'll never ever run out of new things to learn? What a great story of Belle. And as you know, Belle is intelligent, generous, a lifelong learner, loyal, passionate, authentically herself, which showed in the book, and her dream is to never stop learning. Well, that's pretty much evidence here. Her heroic moment was sacrificing her freedom to save her father. And her sidekick is the candelabra lumiere. Her famous quote, I want adventure in the great wide somewhere. Now here's my question for you. What is your most inspiring story?